How should your contending dynasty rosters deal with the slew of holdouts from all of our favorite fantasy stars? We discussed that and some more of your burning dynasty questions on today's episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Magdziuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. My name is Kate Magdziuk. When I'm not doing this, I work as an editor and contributor with Yahoo Fantasy Football. And here to break down with me all of the answers to your burning questions about your dynasty questions is Matt Williamson, my good friend, our co-host here. Be sure to give him a follow on X at Williamson NFL and give his YouTube channel a follow for some exclusive and awesome analysis. Matt, today we are going to be talking about some interesting situations that it's going to make our contending dynasty rosters a little tricky. We've got several wide receiver holdouts right now that I'm going to be honest, I'm not convinced if we don't see movement in terms of a contract that we might not see CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Brandon Aiyuk play to start the season. I want to hear, how are you managing that? Because obviously these players are kind of very often cornerstones of these contending dynasty rosters. What do we do if we're kind of looking in the mirror and we're saying, I might not have my star to start the season?
Yeah, it's a tough one because, yesterday we did a stock down episode and almost put this whole group in the stock down because no way they stock up. There's concern. We don't know that they'll necessarily play in week one. And then we decided, let's do a whole segment on it. Because it's a pretty big topic because these guys are high asset players. Some of them, most of these guys would be first round picks and startups right now. They're huge assets. So I hear you that maybe they miss time, but I can't imagine that they sit out the year. Lev Bell did that. It was a really foolish move, especially for a running back in the prime of his career. Not only you lose the money, but your stock goes down. You become less desirable to the rest of the league. You become a year older, of course. So I think history shows us when we have deadlines, these things get done. So I know this isn't real exciting, but my advice is just sit on them or put an offer in for them. If you don't own one of them, maybe put an offer in for them because trading them right now seems insane to me.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think the whole reason I wanted to have this discussion is because, I'm not going to lie, on teams where I have a Jamar Chase, even though he has 2 years left on his deal, we're getting word that he might not step back onto a football field before he gets a new contract. And interestingly, the conjecture from the, out of the Bengals organization had to this point seemed to be like, yeah, we're not rushing it. It didn't seem like there was an urgency there. So I think that the general consensus is that NFL teams want to pay their best players and keep them within the organization within reason when it's possible. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway is not to panic here and not to fire sell these wide receivers, even if you are in a contending situation, just to kind of fill a void. So I think the next question is, are there some contingency plans that we can be making right now for our dynasty rosters? Are there some low end draft targets that maybe you would recommend? If we have to fill a roster spot, if we have to fill a wide receiver slot, are there any low end values right now that you could see being a reasonable holdover? If you're the CeeDee Lamb manager, are you looking to go and grab, Brandon Cooks, for instance, or are you willing to, I don't know, is Juwan Jennings too big a reach? What are your contingency plans in terms of, maybe grabbing a little bit of backup or insurance policy when it comes to these players.
Yeah, let's give that some thought. I want to throw one thing out before we get there is these three. The one that actually worries me the most, I think, is Jamar Chase, because it sure seems, we've heard about Aiyuk forever. It seems like something will get done one way or another on him. I think Lamb will sign a bigger contract than anyone named Justin Jefferson, and that probably happens soon too. But the reason the Chase one worries me most is, first of all, as you mentioned, he's a year younger than these guys, so he doesn't have as strong a leg to stand on. And what really worried me is dealing with the Bengals. You know, like, T. Higgins tried to make a stand against the Bengals too, got nowhere. Now, this is going to sound crazy, but if you look at the net worth of the 32 owners, Cincinnati, I think, is last. Like, they're not living under a bridge in a barrel or anything, but I mean,
yeah, like as far as millionaires go,
they're hurting the most, you know, right? But they act that way too. You know, I mean, they dig their heels in on contracts. The Brown family's done this with Carson Palmer going back to the 80s. You know, they don't budge. I mean, they don't make trades. They don't, you know, bend over backwards for players. And if Chase is going to be really bullish on this, he's probably going to lose the battle. And maybe that means a month of sitting out or whatever. I just don't like that it's the Bengals.
I also don't like that it's the Bengals. And again, you mentioned like this whole situation with T. Higgins, which I'll say like part of that situation, I think, is also rooted in the fact that this organization knows they're going to need to pay Jamar Chase.
Yeah.
If I'm the Bengals, honestly, I probably want to get it done sooner rather than later. As you mentioned, there might not be as cash rich in terms of like what they can put into escrow for these long-term contracts, the guarantees. So like maybe they're trying to stockpile cash over the next couple of years to funnel into the Jamar Chase guaranteed money fund. But I do think that like the timing of it is interesting. And I'm not saying he doesn't really have the leverage, but it definitely doesn't feel like he's got them in a pickle, right? Like it is 2 full years left on this contract. So he's
not going to sit out 2 years.
Yeah, you're not going to sit out 2 years. And then there's the fact that like, you even see, you know, the franchise tag next year. He could be franchise or the 5th year option next year.
Mm-hmm.
He could be franchise tagged after that. So like he really doesn't
for 6 years.
Yeah, like it's kind of scary, to be honest. And again, I'm not saying I don't think they had intention to pay Chase, but I don't necessarily knew that this freight train was coming as quickly as it did. Mm-hmm. And they're probably in a pickle. But again, if I'm the Bengals, it kind of suits you to pay these receivers and pay these players now as opposed to next year. Who knows, you know, what kind of record-setting contracts we'll get. Like, I feel like a good amount of these wide receivers were paid, but you still don't know what's around the other corner, right? Like, what's going to be the next extension, the next long-term deal that is going to reset the market and totally, you know, reconfigure your cap situation for, you know, how long to come. Like, I definitely think you need to hold pat. I think, you know, like if you're the Jamar Chase manager, maybe you know, throw a 3rd or 4th for Brandon Cooks. But I think that the general the general idea here is that doing something probably means doing nothing in this.
Yeah. And back to, you know, who do you pivot to? For redraft reasons, Higgins is an obvious one, but I don't think he's going to be a Bengal more than this year, so that's not really a dynasty conversation. It could open the door for Burton to get out there with 3 receiver sets, and he seems like he's worthy. But are you starting him on Sunday morning? Are you checking the box to put Burton in your lineup? You know what I mean? Not quite.
I wouldn't feel good about that.
Yeah. No, right. I mean, there's been some good Tolbert buzz in Dallas, but I'm not going to plug him in my lineup all of a sudden.
Yeah. Definitely a tricky situation, but, you know, we'll see how this develops. If we get even closer to the season, we'll probably have to do an update here. And maybe we do throw out some extra late round names. Now I want to talk about year 2 wide receivers to watch here that might have the biggest jump in value here in dynasty leagues over the next year. That's coming up next. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Today, we've got something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of the NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Personally, I'm eyeing some of those season-long stat total props. Matt, you know we love TJ Watt plus 500 to lead the NFL in sacks. Like, you're going to smash that every time. I'm also loving Jane Daniels plus 600 for Offensive Rookie of the Year. There are so many bets to choose from, so many stat lines to choose from. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen today. Your second listen, be sure to go and enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insights to the best fantasy football draft strategies from Michelle Magdziuk and analyst Vinny Iyer, so you can win your fantasy leagues this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Matt, we had, I would say, an interesting 2023 draft class. There were a lot of names that kind of fell in this mid-tier. We had JSN, we had Jordan Addison, who had a fantastically productive season, especially thanks to the touchdown production. But our listeners want to know, what year two wide receiver should we be watching in terms of a player that could have the potential to gain the most value here in 2024? Because I think there are a lot of options. There are definitely a lot of options here. I've outlined some of them. If you're watching along with us on YouTube, I've highlighted some of the names that I think could check the boxes. All wide receivers, rounds 1 through 3. We've got, again, your JSN, your Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison. But there are a lot of intriguing names that fell out of the first round that could be in for a bump in value.
I jotted a few down. I think the easiest one by far is JSN, and he was my favorite receiver in that class. I still have extremely high hopes for him. I think he leads Seattle in receiving this year and the coming years, but he's not cheap either. I mean, the other guys, Josh Downs, I am really, really high on, but I don't love the injury situation as we speak, and I wonder, a slot machine like Downs needs an accurate on-time quarterback. I don't know that he has that in Indianapolis, and there's also a lot of mouths to feed there, so I don't know that he'll get the volume that he deserves, but I love the player. Sticking with the Bengals, Yoshevich, I always say his name wrong, but in Cincinnati is establishing himself as the 3, and a year from now, I assume it'll be Chase, him, and Burton as the starting 3, so I think he's here to stay, and Higgins leaves. And then digging deep is a guy I liked a year ago that was awful last year, but the buzz has been really good on Mingo with Carolina. So I think don't dump him yet, I guess is what I'm saying there. Try to get him as a throw-in a trade or something like that.
Yeah, I think maybe, Jonathan Mingo, definitely not a trade target, but has that second-round draft capital. Obviously, the team traded for Deontay Johnson this season. We're all projecting him to lead this offense, I think, in targets, receptions, receiving yards, etc. But I think there's no argument, Adam Thielen, another year older. Like, the rest of this wide receiver core is pretty much wide open. And I'm pretty sure Deontay Johnson's a free agent after this year.
He is.
Like, this receiver room is wide open. You look at, a player like Nico Collins, who kind of had the traits that, might make him a good wide receiver in the NFL, didn't come to fruition until year 3. Obviously, the quarterback situation was also a play there at Carolina, but I also don't know that we necessarily know what Bryce Young has him, just based on what they had this past season. They upgraded the offensive line. Another hot name, let's talk about Dontavian Wicks, Packers wide receiver, who, I don't think anybody really knows what to make of these Packers wide receivers, because they kind of all feel smushed together. in terms of their dynasty value. I don't think anybody has a really clear-cut idea of like who's going to be that top dog, if they have any top dog, quote unquote. But like, all off season long, we've gotten some positive reports about Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed. Like, it feels like there's kind of been a rotating door here when it comes to these Packers wide receivers, and they're all pretty close in ADP. Romeo Doubs, wide receiver 50, Dontavian Wicks, wide receiver 53. Like, they're all kind of clumped together. So what are your thoughts on, like, from a value standpoint, Dontavian Wicks and Jane Reed both coming out of this 2023 class? Who do you prefer? Dontavian Wicks, again, wide receiver 53. Jaden Reed going a fair bit earlier here in terms of dynasty startup ADP, wide receiver 39. So again, it's not outrageous, but like,
no.
At cost, which of those two Green Bay wide receivers in the 2023 class do you prefer?
At cost, I prefer Wicks. And, next segment, we're going to talk about foggy tight end depth charts. And I have Green Bay on my list there, too. And it's maybe as frustrating as the wide receiver room because I like them all. Which of your kids do you like best type of thing? I'm still a fan of Christian Watson. I love both tight ends. All these mouths can't get fed. And they like Romeo Doubs more than I do. And that just kind of roadblocks things from the way I see it, But, Kate, we're both Steeler people. Like, if the Steelers were to trade for a wide receiver in Green Bay, I would say go after Wicks. He's the one I think that profiles, if he hits, as a target earner, one type receiver without as many. Those other guys are a little more niche. They all do their own things really well, where I think Wicks could do all the above well if he hits, and he's a little cheaper. But deep down, it's just frustrating. I don't know that we'll ever have answers. And it's the same conversation. Like, I love all of them, but can you check the box on Sunday morning? Not yet.
Not yet for any of them. But
yeah,
with this, kind of richness at receiver, there's, that confidence for Jordan Love that he's going to be able to take the next step because, again, though none of these guys, Jaden Reed is the exception here, round 2 draft capital. None of them have super high draft capital. Christian Watson also second round draft capital, but I don't know that anybody's really looking at him as like the next value pick in Dynasty. It's an interesting situation. I do think like right now, if you have a preference in terms of these Green Bay wide receivers, you need to just pull the trigger and trade for that player because I do think this is kind of a time where, because there's so much uncertainty, we only have a 1-year sample size and not everybody was healthy all year long. Like, we had 2 rookies in the mix. There are a lot of variables here that can, shift here going into year 2 of Jordan Love as a starter. I think if you have your preference, you need to just take your shot because if the pecking order really does start to establish itself here in 2024, I could picture the market for these wide receivers in Dynasty shifting very dramatically.
And knowing the Packers, though, they'll draft another one next year that'll be good.
They're so annoying.
They're so annoying because they're so good at it. Part of me thinks if I owned these guys, I might just put them on the trade block and see what flies show up, And because even though I like the players, it's just I don't want to deal with the headache.
It is. That's exactly what it is. It's a headache. And you know what else is a headache? Some of these very ambiguous tight end depth charts. We mentioned the Packers, but there are a few around the league that I think are, just lingering in terms of question marks, etc. So we will get to that right here next. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. When I lived in downtown Pittsburgh, I was just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Heinz Field, as I call it, the Heinz Field Stadium. Now it's Acrisure, but I was about a 10-minute walk from the stadium. And you know what? I didn't have season tickets, but every Sunday, I got a little itch that I needed to scratch to go see my favorite team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. So what I did, I pulled up the Game Time app. I found the seats I wanted. They give you even like views from your seat, what exactly you're going to be seeing, the angle of the game you're going to be seeing, and you buy your tickets. It's that easy. No planning involved for me, which is perfect because, I like to live vicariously, or, live on the seat of my pants for the football season. It's the fastest growing ticket app in the country for a reason. Again, get the images of your seat before you buy tickets in a matter of seconds, and then they're sent directly to your phone. So you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON, LOCKEDONFL for $20 off. Terms apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are closing out today's show talking about some of the most ambiguous tight end depth charts, whether or not we can find some value. So, Matt, please tell us about one of your picks for most interesting tight end depth charts, because we just talked about the Packers wide receivers and how we can't figure that out. What do you make of the two very talented tight ends that they have in Green Bay between Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave? Which one are you buying?
I've always been a huge Musgrave believer, but I don't like the situation, and really just rewind a couple of minutes and listen to the Packer receiver conversation for why I don't know about getting out, but tight ends are a little bit more of a slow burn. By the time these guys are 26, 27 in their prime, they might be elsewhere or massive contributors. So I'm not ditching them at all, but they're just stashes at the moment. My favorite one, and I don't know if this counts as ambiguous or not, is Jonnu Smith with the Dolphins. I've been buying him the second he got signed, all over the place. All they care about is speed. He can really run. He had a good year last year. I think he is the guy to buy right now.
Very interesting. I do feel like there's been a bit of a Jonnu Smith movement. I like to think that I was at the front of it here. But Jonnu Smith actually posted a career year last year with the Atlanta Falcons, and that was as the backup tight end to Kyle Pitts, like in an offense that was incredibly frustrating under Arthur Smith. So, like, if that's his value as a backup, I know there have been questions like he just hasn't really gotten back on his feet after we saw the kind of upside that he had with the Tennessee Titans. But it feels like he kind of very quietly righted the ship. Is that a term, righted the ship?
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, it works. He got the ship back on track here in this season. Like, we look at, when I'm trying to identify a potential value, I'm looking at, target share opportunity. We know that the Miami Dolphins run the football a lot, but we know that they pass incredibly and efficiently well. So, like, that efficiency makes up for that lack of volume there. OBJ been dealing with injuries, so like they don't really have an established wide receiver 3. Jonnu Smith, he's big, he's physical, he's got yards after the catch ability. Like, all of those things are reasons that I'm also in on Jonnu Smith. Another confusing tight end situation we have here is with the Indianapolis Colts, who just like haven't been able to find a reliable tight end, health issues like crazy. Are there any tight ends that you're looking to buy with the Indianapolis Colts? Just looking at their depth chart, looking at the opportunity. Obviously, there's a lot of depth at wide receiver for them as well. Is there an opportunity to like get in on the ground floor here for the Colts, or are you just out?
Maybe. Real quick on the Dolphins, you kind of nailed it too. I get the impression that this offseason, one of their goals was to find a third pass catcher. And I don't think Odell's someone I'm going to count on. They drafted 2 receivers. They signed Jonnu. I think Jonnu's the one that sets up best for that. As for Indianapolis, just like the Downs conversation, I fear that they can't support a huge number of pass catchers because they're going to run the ball a ton. There are obvious accuracy issues with the quarterback. But I've been a Jelani Woods fan forever, and I just think there's a ton of ability there. as we said, these tight ends sometimes take a while, but it wouldn't shock me if a year or two from now, he is clearly the best option there and maybe even a top 12 type fantasy tight end.
I think that's fair. He's definitely my favorite of the option, or my favorite of the bunch. Does have a toe injury, could miss some significant time. So, we'll see how quickly he returns. I just saw it out indefinitely as, the latest update. So, does that mean for the season? I don't know. I do think, maybe one question or one interesting player option in an intriguing in a intriguing receiving core. What about this Patriots wide open receiving core? They've had a slew of injuries at the tight end position. Jaheim Bell coming out of FSU, suddenly kind of on top of the depth chart here in the New England system, which we don't really know what that New England system is, to be fair. We don't know even who's starting, but Jaheim Bell, he was a top end athlete coming out of FSU. He's a little on the smaller side, but basically a big boy wide receiver, 6'2", 241 pounds. So kind of an odd size, but 4.61, 40-yard dash, 86 percentile, 10-yard split, big hands, 35-inch vert, 124-inch broad jump, 91st percentile. Jaheim Bell in this kind of wide open New England Patriots offense?
Not terrible. Yeah, he's got a good receiving profile. You laid it out there. He's a good athlete. He can run. I don't know the scheme well. I think it's going to be one of the worst offenses in the league. So there's not going to be 35 touchdown passes to go around, but somebody's going to catch the ball. And people seem to be dropping like flies in terms of receiving options. I do think it's somewhat of a misnomer that rookie quarterbacks always count on their tight end. I don't think that's actually true at all, to be honest with you. But
sometimes, if they're not even used to, or sometimes it takes them a minute to get a feel, especially for the middle of the field too, and that's primarily what the tight ends are going to play. So, I think that's a great point to make, especially, hinging on Drake May and what could potentially be his starting offense.
Yeah. So, I think he's a good stash. He's got as good a chance as anyone, more or less, to emerge there. And it's a good call. Yeah, I hadn't thought of New England at all. I had the Jets on here. I had Washington, the Rams. None of them are super sexy to me, but I like the call on Bell.
Tyler Conklin with the New York Jets. I don't know that I really believe in a age 29 tight end breakout, but tight end 27 and Dynasty startup ADP right now. He's also kind of an intriguing option. When I'm looking for these tight end breakouts, I'm kind of looking at the fact that okay, what is their pathway to targets? There's not a lot working behind Garrett Wilson. Obviously, you have Williams coming off a torn ACL. He's missed training camp, so he's been out of the loop there. Does he come in and need some time to acclimate to the offense, acclimate to, build chemistry with Aaron Rodgers? There's so many question marks here. And maybe, we just see Tyler Conklin kind of emerge as this guy who is suddenly playing with the best quarterback of his career. Kind of underrated, steady production throughout his career, though he never really reached his peak. So maybe we see that. Anybody else you want to shout out as a potential low end buy on one of these kind of crowded, icky tight end depth charts?
I guess my last name is Parkinson with the Rams. I think he has some ability. I trust the coordinator and the head coach, play caller, and quarterback to use him to the best of his abilities, I guess.
Very fair. I like all that. Hopefully you guys have found a maybe sneaky gem of a tight end here on today's show. That is it for us today. Tomorrow I will be back. Marcus is still on vacation, but don't worry, we're still here to get you all the best Dynasty advice. Be sure to give Matt a follow at Williamson NFL. You could follow me on X at Kate Magdziuk, and we will see you guys tomorrow.